So if your head spins, you can always watch the video. You can always get the slides from Dax or Dale. But this is a topic I had planned to do, and then I think it was the first week I mentioned the idea of two powers in heaven and two Yahwehs. And that prompted a question afterwards, like, what in the world are you talking about? Well, this is the week for that. I want to go through this because this is fundamentally one of the more important things that we can learn about contextualizing Jesus against the Old Testament. And I also think it's one of the more important things that if you're familiar with, it has a strong apologetic value, a strong evangelistic value for Jewish seekers, Jewish friends that you might have, and Messianic Christians, and I think, frankly, just for us as well, because sometimes we get either caught with a question or maybe in our own mind we wonder, well, where in the world did they get this stuff? I mean, yes, again, we can appeal to Revelation, and I've mentioned this before. Well, God just told them that information. No kidding. I mean, God can do that. But there's a lot to be said for continuity between the Testaments, and I think this is one of the most striking examples of it. And I'm going to take you through a number of passages tonight again quickly to try to introduce you to the answer for a really basic question. And that is, since Christianity was born out of Judaism and the first converts were naturally Jewish, how is it that God-fearing Jews could wrap their minds around the notion of worshiping and praying and speaking of the God of Israel as God, and in the same breath doing the same thing to Jesus? Why did they not see that as a problem? Why did they not think it was a violation of monotheism or of the Shema, the Lord our God is one? The answer to that comes from the Old Testament, because they had a two Yahwehs mental backdrop from their own scriptures, that when Jesus came along, it was very easy to move toward him being the second Yahweh, the second power. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how this works in Judaism up to the 2nd century AD, and then, of course, apply that to the New Testament and the Old Testament. Now, this is an important book if you wanted to really read in this subject. This is the one I recommend. Written in 1977 by Alan Siegel. He's a Jew. He's a Jewish professor of Jewish studies. I think he still teaches at NYU. Two powers in heaven. Now, he views the two powers teaching as a heresy because he's Jewish. But his book is about the fact that it used to not be a heresy. And that's what drew him into the topic. This is actually a publication of some work he did on his dissertation way back when. Siegel says, the basic heresy involved interpreting Scripture to say that a principal angelic or hypostatic manifestation in heaven, in other words, another character, was equivalent to God. Okay, that was the basic issue. The idea of the second power was not considered heretical until the 2nd century CE. That's AD. It means the same thing. So sometime during the 100s, Jewish theology changed. Prior to that, it was okay to talk about two gods, two Yahwehs in heaven. But after that, it was not. Other scholars have made similar observations, namely that the rabbinic polemic of late antiquity, again, their arguments against Christians against two powers in heaven, arose from rabbinic unease about much material in the Hebrew Bible which seemed too close to paganism for comfort. In other words, it seemed non-monotheistic. So the rabbis were a little uneasy about things in their own scriptures that seemed inconsistent. I'm not describing Zoroastrianism. I'm not talking about a good Yahweh and a bad Yahweh, good and evil. I'm not talking about that kind of dualism. I'm also not talking about Gnosticism, with the true God, the ethereal, non-personal God, and then the demiurge, the creator, the God of the Bible, which Gnostics view as evil. Okay, I'm not talking about that either. This is not good and evil. These are both good guys, okay, both positive, holy figures. A couple examples of texts that the rabbis talked about. Genesis 19:24. Take a quick look at that, and I will ask you what seems odd about the verse. Yahweh rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from Yahweh out of heaven. Well, what's odd is that Yahweh occurs twice. So Yahweh rains down fire from Yahweh. It's just awkward. And there were some rabbis that thought, that just sounds really odd, or I don't know how we would handle that in the context of the Shema. Again, the Lord our God is one. Amos 4:11, I have wrought destruction among you as when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Now wait a minute. The speaker at the end of the verse is Yahweh. And he's saying, I did this and this and this, just like when God did that. So like who's Yahweh referring to? He's referring to himself and then God. Like we have two figures. Okay? There they are. Isaiah 13, behold, I stir up the Medes against them. In Babylon, glory of kingdoms, proud splendor, the Chaldeans shall overcome, or shall become like Sodom and Gomorrah, overturned by God. There's the same thing. I stir up. Okay, then we have God like a third person reference. And what's really unusual, if you go to Jeremiah, the parallel passage, it's very clear that Yahweh is the one doing this, and then there's this other reference to God along with the first person language. There are actually a decent number of these in the Old Testament where God is speaking, then refers to God in the third person. It's just very odd, very awkward. Prior to the time of the rabbis, Rabbinic Judaism is something we sort of view as formulating, or as we think of it, forming after the New Testament era. It actually has roots that are older than that in some of the sects of Judaism, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees and things like that. So prior to what is properly the Rabbinic era, back into the New Testament era and in the Second Temple period, intertestamental period, there was a lot of speculation about who the second power was. Some thought it was Jacob. I'm going to run through these texts really quickly. This is the prayer of Joseph. It's a pseudepigraphical text. These are all Jewish, okay? They're all intertestamental. So this is prior to Christianity. I, Jacob, who is speaking to you, am also Israel, an angel of God and a ruling spirit. So there Israel's called an angel. Jacob is like an angel now. I am he whom God called Israel, which means a man seeing God. The next section, I, Israel, the archangel of the power of the Lord and the chief captain of the sons of God. So Jacob becomes an angelic figure, and he becomes the lead of all the heavenly host, in some Jewish thinking. Adam was sort of viewed this way by others. In 2nd Enoch, and on earth I assigned him, again God is speaking about, the writer speaking about Adam, first person language of God, and on earth I assigned him to be a second angel. Well, wait a minute, Adam, a second angel? Honored and great and glorious, and I assigned him to be a king, to reign on the earth and to have my wisdom, which is an interesting phrase considering week 2 when we talked about wisdom. Adam is also elevated higher than a principal angel in another text, Life of Adam and Eve. In this text, he's called, Satan is called to worship Adam, the image of God, testament of Abraham. Abraham is shown a man seated on a golden throne who has a terrifying appearance like the masters, like gods. And he finds out this is the first form to Adam. So Adam becomes this exalted sort of number 2 or right there with God kind of figure. Enoch himself, in one text, gets sort of taken to heaven, like we have, in the language of Ezekiel, some of these visionary experiences of biblical characters. Enoch, in the book of 1st Enoch, this happens to him. And he says, he falls on his face before the Lord of spirits. I saw countless angels, with them the Ancient of Days. Again, that's right out of Daniel. Then an angel came to me and greeted me and said to me, you son of man. Okay, right there, you can see there's something going on, because if you're familiar with Daniel 7, which we discussed a couple of weeks already, in Daniel 7 you have the Ancient of Days, who's the enthroned God, and then the Son of Man comes to him, something like a human being comes to the Ancient of Days, and under that human one is given the everlasting kingdom. Well, here in 1st Enoch becomes the Son of Man, which is, of course, a title that Jesus has in the New Testament. But this is before the New Testament. He says, you, Son of Man, who are born in righteousness, and so on and so forth. He says, Enoch, don't be frightened. Stand up, stand in front of my face forever. The Lord said to Michael, go and extract Enoch from his earthly clothing and get rid of that flesh stuff, and anoint him with my delightful oil and put him into clothes of my glory. And at the end, Enoch says, I looked at myself and I had become like one of his glorious ones. So even Enoch himself, in the book that bears his name, becomes this sort of exalted figure right there with the enthroned Yahweh. Moses, this is an interesting passage. On Sinai's peak, Moses, saw what seemed a throne. Those are familiar biblical passages. I made approach and stood before the throne. He handed over the scepter and bade me mount the throne and gave me the crown. Then he himself withdrew from off the throne. Now, if you have some Jewish thinkers and religious authorities in between the Testaments viewing Moses to this level, it makes it kind of interesting when Paul and Jesus and other New Testament writers are making a contrast between Jesus and Moses, between the gospel and the law. Again, you have this sort of friction that's just going to happen. But for some, Moses was like a second deity. Other people thought it was angels, not humans who become angels or humans that just get to sit on the throne. Some people thought it was Michael. Michael is called in Daniel the chief intercessor for Israel. And in the Testament of Dan, another pseudepigraphical book, now fear the Lord, my children, be on guard against Satan and his spirits. Draw near to God and to the angel who intercedes for you, because he is the mediator between God and men. Sounds a lot like 1 Timothy, doesn't it? Okay, but in this case, that mediator is Michael. As a little bit of a rabbit trail, one of the traditions in Seventh-day Adventism is to identify Michael with Jesus. And it's because of, maybe passages like this. I don't know how much awareness there is of it, but there's a whole body of tradition that creates and argues for and articulates similarities between Jesus and Michael, and it's because of this number 2 position. Yahoel is an angel that gets a name in pseudepigraphical literature. You'll notice the name Yah, it's short for Yahweh, that actually occurs in the Old Testament. El, of course, another name for God. So we have an angel that bears 2 divine names. And Abraham is commanded to worship God in one text. And here, Yahoel appears to be the God of Israel, because look at all these titles: Eternal One, Mighty One, Holy El, God, Autocrat. You get to the verse 13, El, Yahel. Okay. But you have other passages that sort of muddy those waters. The same figure appears in life of Adam and Eve. They, the angels, came to God and said, Yahel, eternal King, command that fragrant incenses from paradise be given to Adam. Here, Yahel or Yahoel looks like the God of Israel. But here, in a third passage, they're distinguished. I heard the voice of the Holy One speaking. Okay, now this is God speaking. Go, Yahel, of the same name, through the mediation of my ineffable name. So God is commanding Yahoel to do something. So they're different characters now, even though Yahoel has all those attributions, all those epithets of deity, of the God of Israel. Lo, I am sent to you to strengthen you and to bless you. The last line in bold there, I am Yahel, and with me Michael blesses you forever. Isn't that interesting? Michael's distinguished. So in heaven, according to this writer, you've got God, this Yahoel guy, and Michael. The 3 of them are distinguished. But one of them is described in the same terms that you would reserve for the God of Israel. So you have the God of Israel and then like another one, or what? And what's going on here? That's the point. There's a lot of confusion. To us it's confusion, and to them I'm sure they wrestled with it. But there's a lot of effort being put in to identifying who is actually at the top in heaven, and yet they're Jews. You would think, well, that shouldn't even be a question. But it was. Philo, another Jewish writer, He wrote a lot in Greek, and he uses the word logos, which of course later on in the New Testament gets attributed to Jesus. Philo says of the logos, God sustained the universe to rest firm and sure upon the mighty logos who is my viceroy. So the logos here is God's vizier, God's vice-regent, his co-ruler, sort of in description. The logos is, quote, that power of his, that power of God's by which he made and ordered all things. That sounds very New Testament. Remember we talked about how Jesus was the agent of creation in a number of New Testament texts. Not only is God between the two primary powers, that's picking up with a different context, but so is the Logos. While God is indeed one, there's an affirmation of the Shema on Philo's part, his highest and chief powers are two, goodness and sovereignty. And in the midst of between the two, there's a third which unites them, the Logos, for it is through the Logos that God is both ruler and good. So here we have like God's attributes funneled through this other guy, which sounds really odd. And to a Jew today, it would sound almost blasphemous. Like God doesn't need anybody else. What's this language about, the attributes are in this other being? Philo also refers to the Logos as God, theos. He uses the term deuteros theos, the second God. And he refers to there being two gods, a synonym for two powers in Jewish thought. That's a quote from Siegel, citing Philo's writings. So what I want you to see here is that these are Jews. None of these people, none of these writers, none of these books were ever anathematized as heretical. This was a commonly accepted speculation about who is at the top in the heavenly realm because of something we will see in a moment. Because of certain things that are going on in the Old Testament. And the rabbis knew their text really well. And they picked up on some of the odd passages like Genesis 19, some of this language where God is speaking and then refers to God. They knew that really well. And so between the Testaments, they're coming up with candidates. Afterwards, though, after they declare it a heresy, they need to come up with some other explanation because we can't accept that there's two. Because we've made that a no-no now. So later rabbis did this. Exodus 15:3 was sort of their beginning proof text. Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. So what they said, and Siegel cites one of the later rabbis, and here's his explanation or his exegesis. Yahweh is a man of war is to be interpreted as a descriptive statement referring to God's manifestation as a young warrior when he destroyed the Egyptians at the Red Sea. Yahweh is his name. That's necessary because at Sinai he reveals himself as an old man. So what the rabbis are saying is, look, all this stuff that looks like two Yahwehs, it's really one Yahweh but manifested in two ways. It's two modes, it's two manifestations, it's two sort of appearances. Is God ever described as an old man on Sinai? No, he's not. Okay, I'll just plant that seed right now because this is going to break down pretty quickly. But this is the rabbinical view. Okay, that we're talking about one person in two modes of existence, and they're going to try to go to their scriptures to demonstrate that. And the major text is Daniel 7. Siegel notes again the proof text used by the rabbis. As I looked on, thrones were set in place. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was white as snow, hair and head like lamb's wool. So there he's old. Throne was tongues of fire again, just like Ezekiel 1. It's God. We know who that is. The court sat, the books were open. One like a human being came with clouds of heaven. He reached the Ancient of Days. And so there's this other one who's a man. Okay? So the rabbis say, aha, we've got an old God and a God who's a man figure. But they're really just two they're really the same guy, but depending on like where you were at and looked in the scene, you would see one and then you would see the other. And, this one symbolizes this and that one symbolizes the other. Problem. There are other places that I'm going to show you, either at Sinai or not, where you have a description of God and this breaks down. There's no old man in Exodus 3. Exodus 3 is the burning bush. There are two figures in there, and neither of them are old men. We'll show that passage in a moment. The warrior man who's elsewhere identified as the angel of the Lord, who's in the burning bush with Exodus 3, is with Yahweh, so how can they be the same? You could ask the same for Daniel 7. If they're both there at the same time, how are they the same in just different modes? Okay? And there's another passage that we'll look at that really creates problems for that. And third, the Son of Man in Daniel 7 is never cast as a warrior. So the rabbinical explanation of same God, two different modes, might sound like it works, but there are problems. These are three initial ones. Siegel admits this. He says, well, in his mind, this is the answer, because he's Jewish. But he says, I have to be honest, it may easily be describing two separate divine figures anyway. So, what do you gain? Well, not a whole lot. Let's go back to the scriptures, actually, and I'll show you what leads up to all this, and show you how the Jews were better off saying, hey, there's two, just like they did before they declared it a heresy, because that's going to become apparent when I go through this. They're better off doing that than after they declared it a heresy and saying, oh, it's just one guy in two forms. Okay, that one is really hard to defend. The other one is pretty much apparent. Now, go back here. The word I'm not going to spend any time on because we've hit this for 2 weeks. There's the Word of God who comes to certain individuals and he is embodied at times. At times the language of physicality is attributed to the Word. Okay, we've seen those passages. Let's talk about the name. Sometimes God is referred to as the name, or the name of the Lord does things, and then later he's referred to as God. The idea comes from Deuteronomy, specifically this chapter. Do not worship the Lord your God in like manner, but look only to the site that the Lord your God will choose amidst all your tribes as his habitation, to establish his name there. Now this is God, through Moses, telling Joshua and the people what they're supposed to do when they get into the promised land. One of the things that they're going to do is they're going to build a temple. They're going to build a central site at which God is worshipped. And you see this phrase occur in Deuteronomy a lot. The temple is referred to as the place where the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name. Now, we know from descriptions of the temple that the idea wasn't, well, when you build a thing, then you take some sharp object and scratch, the 4 consonants in the door, or something like that. It was never commanded, it was never done. It's language that says, this is where I'm going to decide to live, okay? I'm going to be there. I'm going to set my name there. Now you think, well, if that's the point, why doesn't God just say, hey, I'm going to live there? Okay, because God's telling you, somewhat cryptically, that I'm going to put myself there, but I'm still everywhere else. It's the language of localization, but yet God can't just be at only one place. It's sort of an expression for God's essence, his glory. He's going to inhabit the temple. And we know that that's how it was because we read through the books of Kings and all that and other passages. So is the name just another way of referring to Yahweh? It is, in most instances. Here's an example. May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. Okay, now, names aren't alive. They're not persons. They're not entities. They can't do anything. Okay, but the God of Israel is a person who's active and powerful. And so the idea isn't that somehow, 4 letters are going to come to your assistance. Rather, the being that those 4 letters represent. Okay, that's who you're trusting in. So it's another way of referring to God himself. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Pretty straightforward. It gets a little strange, though, as this gets articulated. 2 Samuel, most English translations really cheat on this one. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel. This is when they're moving the ark. David arose and went to all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called the Name. The ark is called the name of the Lord. Now the ESV has the ark is called by the name of the Lord of hosts. Now I'm sorry, that is just wrong. Because here's what the Hebrew says. It says, Asher Nikra Shem, who is called the name Shem Adonai Tzevaot, the name of the Lord of hosts. Okay, name occurs twice in the verse. It's very clear. The ark was called the name. Now, what does that mean? Anybody? Why would you associate the ark with the presence of Yahweh?
His writing is inside.
Right. The tablets are inside. What are some other reasons? What is it about the ark? Cherubim on top, the mercy seat. This is where God was perceived to sit or be. Okay, the tent of meeting, all that Old Testament imagery. This is the place where God was. Okay? Just like the temple, which is why they put the ark in the temple later on. Actually, they put the whole tabernacle in the temple, but you don't need a rabbit trail there. Isaiah 30:27. Sometimes the name is personified as though it were a person. Because again, it's just a substitute for Yahweh. Behold, the name of the Lord comes from afar. Well, like names don't travel. In blazing wrath, with a heavy burden, his lips full of fury. Well, again, that's language of personification. The name is now cast as a person. His tongue like devouring fire. Now, the name theology becomes important when you start looking at the angel of the Lord, which is why I always begin with it. Exodus 3, familiar passage. Who's in the bush? God. Yeah, he is. Who else? He's not alone. Okay, verse 2. An angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. Okay, it's Moses. He says, boy, I got to turn aside and look at this. And then in verse 4, when Yahweh saw that Moses, had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush. So you got angel, Yahweh, and God, all three terms used in the passage. Now either the angel is Yahweh, or the angel and Yahweh are separate. And what I'm going to suggest to you through the rest of the time tonight is the answer to that is yes. Okay. The angel is Yahweh, but he's not. He is, but isn't Yahweh. And I've used this language before, and we use it, but we don't maybe think about it when we talk about Jesus. Jesus is God, but he's not. Okay, he's not the Father. In other words, we distinguish persons within the Godhead, but yet they're all equal in essence. That's what's going on here and in a number of other passages. They have the category of a Godhead, where you've got different, not the same, different entities who are Yahweh but are still distinct. Okay, that's the point you need to fix in your mind. And it comes right out of the Old Testament. Exodus 23, this is the key passage that goes back to the name. God tells Moses when they're embarking to go to the land, I am sending an angel before you to guard you on the way, and to bring you to the place that I have made ready. Pay heed to him and obey him. Do not defy him, for he will not pardon your offenses or forgive your sins, more literally. Why not? He won't do that since my name is in him. My essence, my glory, what I am. Me. I'm in him. He is me, and I am he. Okay, try to parse the language here. My name is in him. And if you go, this is Exodus 23, you go through the Pentateuch, you got the Ark, you got Deuteronomy language. The name was considered to be Yahweh. So the angel is an embodiment of Yahweh. And guess what? Sometimes Yahweh and the angel are both in the same scene. Deuteronomy 4 is a nice backup verse for the essence. Yahweh says, I brought you, or the writer says that Yahweh, the Lord, brought you out of Egypt with his own presence. Okay? We just saw it was the angel, here it's the presence. Exodus 33, God says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Judges 2, the angel of Yahweh came up from Gilgal to Bochim. This is when they're in the land, they're supposed to be getting the job done. The angel shows up. The angel's been with them the whole time. Okay, he led them into the land. And he shows up in a number of episodes. I brought you up from Egypt. Look at the use of I. I brought you up from Egypt. I took you into the land, which I had promised on oath to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you, for your part, must make no covenant with the inhabitants in the land. But you have not obeyed me. Look what you've done. And then he basically says, I'm out of here. You're not going to obey? Bye. That's why they call the name of the place Bochim, because they sat there and cried, because the angel's gone. Isaiah 63, again, we have the angel. Who led the children of Israel out of Egypt into the land? Was it Yahweh or was it the angel? And the answer is yes. Okay. Isaiah 63, in their affliction he was afflicted, the angel of his presence saved them. Now, back to the scene at the Red Sea. Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way. Again, very familiar passage. So Yahweh's in the cloud. Then the angel of God, who was going before the host, so he's out in front, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them as well. They're both, again, they're both at the same scene doing things. Joshua 5. This is the captain of the Lord's host passage. Once when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, are you one of us or for our enemies? He replied, no, I'm captain of Yahweh's host. Now I have come. Joshua, of course, goes prostrate. What does my Lord command his servant? The captain of the Lord's host answered Joshua, remove your sandals from off your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy. Where have we heard that before? Burning bush. Not only that, and the angel was at the bush. Okay. Not only that, but the reason I have this in Hebrew is this phrase of 3 words. V'karbo shalofah beyado. And his sword drawn in his hand is used 2 other places in the Old Testament. They are in the Chronicles account of David taking the census. There's a parallel account there, and they're both used explicitly. The person described with the sword drawn in his hand is the angel of the Lord. It's the only 2 places where it occurs, other than this one. So, again, the writers are not. This doesn't happen by accident. They're telegraphing something to you. Judges 6, the angel of Yahweh. This is one of my favorite passages on this because it's just unusual. The angel of Yahweh came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah. Terebinth is a tree, so fix in your mind, who's sitting under the tree? The angel, okay? He has a conversation with Gideon. The angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said, Yahweh's with you. So the angel's speaking of Yahweh as a different person. Gideon says, well, yeah, boy, if he's with me, why is all this bad stuff happening? You go to verse 13. Why has all this stuff befallen us? Yahweh turned to him. Well, where did he come from? How did he get there? I thought it was the angel. Well, it was. Now it's Yahweh. Yeah. Right. Yahweh turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Aren't I sending you? And then, of course, he has this conversation. Verse 16, Yahweh says to him something else. Yahweh speaks to him again, I'll be with you. And he, Gideon, said to him, now we don't know who the him is, because we got two characters. So that's why I have angel and Yahweh with a question mark. Who's he talking to? We're not really clear. If now I have found favor in your eyes, show me a sign that it is you who speaks with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he, whoever he is, said, I will stay until you return. So Gideon went to his house, prepared a young goat, cakes. He brought them to him. There's the him. Where? Under the terebinth. Now, is it right for anyone else but Yahweh to accept an offering or a sacrifice? No, it is not. But you can see what happens. It's the angel who accepts the sacrifice. But no, wait a minute. Wasn't Yahweh always also there? Well, yeah, he was. Is there a problem? No. The writer didn't see any problem. The angel of Yahweh reached out the tip of his staff that was in his hand, touched the meat, the unleavened cakes. Fire sprang up from the rock, consumes it. And the angel of Yahweh vanished from his sight. Okay, my job's over. Bye. See you later. Gideon perceived that he was the angel of Yahweh. That's a brilliant insight there. Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But Yahweh said, Yahweh's still there. So this is the passage that I would take a Jewish friend and saying, look, you can't have it both ways. Yahweh wants two modes or two forms, and you got them coming and going here. You got two different characters. What's the point? And at this point we could launch into how this is similar, how this bears similarity to other ancient Near Eastern ways of describing deity. It's just a necessary thing to speak of deity as embodied on occasion, because we have to be able to detect deity with our own senses, and so that just gets built in. But the issue here is that you have both things happening at the same time, and they're clearly separate characters, and sometimes they're so closely identified you can't tell them apart. And they're even more than that. The same descriptions are used of both. And there's no blasphemy going on here. This is normal discourse for Israelite religion, Israelite theology in the Old Testament. These are not non-canonical books. This is the Torah. This is the Tanakh. It is what it is. Genesis 31, the angel of God comes to Jacob, comes to him in a dream. Jacob says, Here I am. And in verse 13, the angel says, I am the God of Bethel. I mean, how much clearer can it be? He didn't say, hey, the God of Bethel has a message for you, or like, I was there with him. He says, I am the God of Bethel. Jacob had an episode back there at Bethel earlier in his life where he made a pillar and made a vow. Genesis 48, this is when Jacob is blessing his sons. He stretched out, his sons of Joseph, he stretched out his right hand, laid it on Ephraim's head, and then he crosses his hands with Manasseh. And here's his blessing. Here's the point. Jacob says, the God, and in Hebrew it's Ha Elohim, the God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm. No incongruity in Jacob's mind. And the kicker is, may he bless these boys. The verb is singular. You can't tell them apart. And the writer doesn't want you to tell them apart, because if he did, he would have used a plural. He would have said, may they bless these boys. But he doesn't. He says, may he. Which one? God or the angel? The answer is yes. Okay? The cloud rider. He who rides the clouds. Now, Baal, this is a title of Baal. I like to reference this for a couple of reasons, but one is Sometimes you get into discussions with people and they say, well, one was God and the other one was like not really God, just sort of divine or something like that. Well, okay. Let's talk about Baal. Okay, Baal was not mistaken by anyone for being other than a deity across the ancient world. There are Baal shrines practically everywhere you go, hundreds of them. Okay, Baal was a deity to lots of people, all the way into Roman times. They're still worshiping Baal. Baal is not an angel. Okay, he's not something else. He is a god to the ancient people. Okay, one of Baal's titles is the one who rides the clouds. This title, because it was so clearly identified with the deity, this title is used in the Old Testament 4 or 5 times. It is always used, with one exception, of the God of Israel. Because what the Israelite writers are doing is, look, there seems to be some confusion. Like the confrontation with Elijah. Who are you going to worship, Baal or Yahweh? Like, make up your mind. The problem is that the seat of Baal worship was next door in Syria. And so there was a big problem with keeping the Israelites worshiping Yahweh and not Baal. So a couple of times the biblical writers say, okay, Baal's the one who rides the clouds. We're going to use that title and attribute it to Yahweh to make it clear in our readers' minds of just who rides the clouds, who's the one who brings rain, who's the one that grows our crops, all these things that they associated with Baal. So here are some examples. Deuteronomy 33, there's none like God, O Jeshurun, who rides through the heavens to your help. Again, Deuteronomy 33, talking about the God of Israel. Psalm 68, sing to God, sing praises to the Lord, to him who rides in the heavens. Okay? Psalm 104, O Lord my God, you are very great. He lays, this description, covering yourself with light as garments, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. There's, this reference to the rider on the clouds again. Isaiah 19, behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud. Yahweh's riding on a swift cloud. So they're doing this to reinforce that it isn't Baal who does this, who does all the things that we associate with the God who governs the clouds or who controls things up there. It's Yahweh. It's not Baal, it's Yahweh. Here's the exception. As I looked, thrones were set in place. Again, Ancient of Days takes his seat. The court sits, divine council again. I saw in the night visions, and behold, upon the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. Who's the cloud rider now? It's not the seated God of Israel. It's somebody else. There are 2 deities in the passage. This is why this became a critical text for not only the discussion of a second power, but also we have to be able to answer Daniel 7, or we're sunk. Because there's clearly 2. Everybody in the ancient world knew this was a title of deity. The one who rides the clouds. And here it ain't the God of Israel. It's somebody else. Yahweh gets described in human form as well. Genesis 18, he's one of the 3 men who sit down and Abraham brings them a meal, and in verse 8, they eat. So he's clearly embodied. Exodus 24, Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu and the elders go up to Sinai, and it says, point blank, they saw the God of Israel. Okay, under his feet, there's payment of like sapphire stone. This is actually coming from Baal literature as well, because this is a stock description of Baal's palace. And again, they want to be clear, it is not Baal who inhabits the heavens and rules everything. It's Yahweh. Again, this stuff happens a lot in the Old Testament, and it's for theological reasons. They're trying to do a theological corrective to the people who are reading their text. Ezekiel 1. Famous passage in Ezekiel. Likeness on the throne, human appearance. Now let's look at Jesus against all of this. If you were a Semite, if you were a Jew living in the 1st century, if you were familiar with your Old Testament, you knew all the stuff that I just covered, and there's more, you had this idea in your mind that there's Yahweh, but there's actually two. There's the Yahweh who's invisible that we never see, and then there's this other Yahweh that we can see because a lot of times he's in human form. And they're not two gods. We're not worshiping two gods. We're worshiping one. The Lord our God is one. There's unity there. But there's two, and there's still one, and there's two, and they're different. I mean, they had these things in their head that they could sift information through. It was their grid, their interpretive grid. So along comes Jesus. And not only that, but they had all the other Second Temple stuff, where Jewish thinkers are trying to identify the second one. They have all this. Then Jesus comes along, the New Testament writers, and they write stuff like, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. We've seen his glory, the presence. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. No one has ever seen God, the only God who's at the Father's side. Now, wait a minute. I thought God was the Father, so how can God be at the Father's side? Well, it's easy if you have two. Piece of cake. The angel, Jude 5. Now, I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt. Well, wait a minute. I thought that was God. No, it was the angel. Maybe Jesus, angel was the embodied Yahweh, and the Word became, okay, I get it. I'm tracking. John 17, the name. I want you to think about what Jesus is praying here. I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave me out of the world. What? The Jews didn't know the name of God before Jesus got there? Hello? What do you mean they didn't know the name of God? They had the Torah. In Exodus chapter 3, God tells you what his name is. I am that I am. Yahweh's used 3,000 times in the thing. Jesus is not praying that, hey, when I came here, it was really an important part of my job to tell you God's name. How could they not have known that? That isn't the point. I have manifested your name. I have made known your presence to the people whom you gave me out of the world. Yours they were, and you gave them to me. They have kept your word. While I was with them, I kept them in or by your name. So when we got in trouble, I just said, Yahweh. Remember, that's God's name. You didn't know that before I got here. That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying, I kept them through your power, through who you are, through what you are. Because I and the Father are one. I made known to them your name. And I will continue to make it known. This is just another way of Jesus saying that you have never seen the Father unless you've seen me. You've never known the Father unless you've known me. It's the same way of saying, I am him, but I'm still me. Okay? Again, it's this language of fusion and dichotomy at the same time. One who rides the clouds. I saw in the night visions, again, Daniel writing, Son of Man writing on the clouds. Matthew 26. This is Jesus at his trial before Caiaphas. Those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest. The priest stands up and says, don't you have an answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remains silent. The high priest gets a little fed up with that and says to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Quit beating around the bush. Say something. Jesus said to him, you have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. His answer to Caiaphas is he quotes Daniel 7. Like, what kind of an answer is that? I'll tell you what kind of an answer it was. It was a punch in the face, is what it was. He's saying, I am the Son of Man. And this is Jesus' favorite title for himself through the New Testament. Most of the time, it's just a reference to being the human one. But isn't that kind of curious? I mean, honestly, if you met a guy at work that referred to himself as the human one, wouldn't you think he was a little odd? Well, like, no kidding. You know? Most of the time, it's a reference to humanity. But here, he quotes Daniel 7, point blank, and he puts himself in it. And Caiaphas gets it immediately, because look at what he does. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. He just made himself the second Yahweh. He just made himself the second power. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. Caiaphas isn't saying, oh, we got to get rid of this guy because he called himself human. What? No, we got to get rid of this guy because he just called himself the second Yahweh. He's claiming to be God. I mean, it's easy to see when you have the backdrop that the first century Christians did. Now, what I'm not claiming is I'm not saying that in the Old Testament you have a full-blown, full-orbed Christology, Trinitarian Christology like we think of. There are hints of Trinity in the Old Testament. It's easy to show two. There are hints of three. All I'm saying is that the Jews, the Jewish people, it was part of Judaism to have a Godhead. It comes right out of the Old Testament, right out of Israelite religion. And when Jesus comes along, we need to view him, and they did view him against the backdrop of the Old Testament. When Jesus starts going around saying some of the things he's saying, some of it falls, on deaf ears on our end, not because we don't care, but because we just lack the connections. But when they heard him say things like, calling himself the Son of Man, and this or that quotation, they knew exactly what he was saying. And some of them believed it, and others didn't. Some of them were really offended. The problem was not the two powers teaching. The two powers teaching was part of Judaism. What made it indigestible is that this candidate for the second power, according to the New Testament writers, was not some dead guy from the Bible, from the Old Testament. The guy lived thousands of years ago. Well, yeah, he sounds like a good candidate. Wonderful. Whatever. Instead, this was a guy who was alive now and who was doing things that were pretty spectacular. And not only that, but he was running against the grain of the religious authorities of his time in his tradition. And he's claiming to be the one that they've been speculating about for centuries. That was a little hard to take. The other problem was, to be that person, he had to have been born, you had to have Yahweh born of a woman. In other words, he had to be human with all of the frailties associated with it, with all of the somewhat distasteful things associated with it. Jesus had to be potty trained. Jesus puked up his lunch from time to time. Okay, I mean, he just did the things kids do because why? He was human. We know he could bleed. We know he could die. He was human. He wasn't like mostly human. It's not Princess Bride theology. Okay, he was human, all right? He's whole. And that really bothered people. But how could God stoop to that? I'll throw in a third thing. The other problem was the crucifixion. Because if you're trying to convince a Jewish audience of this after the crucifixion, they have to say, in order for them to look at you and say, I believe it, I think you're right, they would have to get over the hump of acknowledging that, we just killed him. Boy, that was a big mistake. Yeah, that sure looks like a boo-boo now. And Peter is real quick in Acts chapter 2 to confront them with just that. But he's also just as quick to say, well, this was part of God's plan. You didn't realize it, but you're still accountable. You did it. And you had to get over that hump. And that was a little too much for a lot of Jews to accept. But many Jews did. Many Jews could look at Jesus and say, this is entirely consistent with what we see in the Torah, with what we see in the Tanakh. It's not a big leap. We're willing to take that leap that it was this one and not these other ones.